Before there were pharmacies, before there were clinics, before there was a single word in any language for what we now call contraception, women were already trying to solve this problem. Not in a casual way, not as an afterthought. With the same urgency that has defined the question across every culture, every continent, and every century that followed. The oldest written record of birth control is approximately 4,000 years old. It comes from ancient Egypt, preserved in a papyrus document called the Kahun Gynecological Papyrus, dated to around 1850 BCE. Researchers at the British Museum first translated it in the early 20th century. The recipe is specific: a paste made from crocodile dung, fermented dough, and honey, inserted into the body before sex. It reads, at first, like something invented to be disgusting, but there is a real mechanism at work. Crocodile dung is alkaline. Modern research has confirmed that alkaline environments are hostile to sperm. The ancient Egyptians did not have electron microscopes. They did not understand pH levels, but over generations of observation, they had arrived at a functional principle. The Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BCE, refines the approach further, recommending acacia tips mixed with honey. Acacia ferments into lactic acid. Lactic acid is still an active ingredient in some modern spermicidal compounds. That is not a coincidence. That is 3,500 years of accumulated human knowledge, compressed into a line of hieroglyphics. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The ancient Greeks picked up where Egypt left off, and they went further. In the 4th century BCE, Aristotle wrote about applying cedar oil, white lead, or frankincense to the cervix before intercourse. Soranus of Ephesus, writing in the 2nd century CE, produced what may be the most comprehensive contraceptive manual of the ancient world. He distinguished between contraceptives and abortifacients with clinical precision, argued that prevention was preferable to termination on medical grounds, and described a mixture of pomegranate pulp, oak gall, and white lead. He also recommended that women hold their breath at the critical moment, stand up immediately, and sneeze. One of those pieces of advice has a plausible mechanism. 2 do not. But that combination, real pharmacology sitting beside wishful thinking, is exactly what you find when people are doing empirical work without the tools to separate correlation from cause. Soranus was not guessing randomly. He was doing the best that observation alone could do. Some of what he recommended would strike a modern pharmacologist as crude. Some of it would not. Pomegranate contains compounds that interfere with estrogen activity. In 1933, biochemist Marion identified similar estrogen-disrupting properties in plant extracts while studying the mechanisms of the human reproductive cycle. He was not looking for a connection to ancient medicine. The connection was already there. The plant that came closest to working was wild carrot, Daucus carota. The ancestor of the modern carrot before selective breeding sweetened it into something recognizable. Women across ancient Greece, Rome, and North Africa chewed the seeds after sex. Ethnobotanist John Riddle spent decades investigating this practice at the University of North Carolina. What he found rewrote how historians thought about ancient contraception. Wild carrot seeds, when taken consistently in the days following intercourse, appear to block progesterone synthesis, a hormone required to prepare the uterine lining for implantation. In laboratory studies published in the 1990s, Riddle's team confirmed that the seeds disrupted implantation in female mice at rates that were not random. The effect was real. It was incomplete, unreliable by modern pharmaceutical standards, and entirely possible to have discovered through repeated observation without knowing a single thing about hormones. Riddle's work forced a major reassessment. For most of the 20th century, the assumption held that ancient birth rates were high simply because people had no effective options. Riddle argued the opposite. He combed through Roman census data, early medieval population records, and Greek gynecological texts, and found that birth rates in certain periods were lower than the biology would predict if contraception were truly absent. His conclusion: ancient women knew more than modern historians had given them credit for. The knowledge was not lost because it never worked. It was lost because it was transmitted orally, practiced privately, and systematically excluded from the written record that men controlled. Riddle's book, published in 1992 under the title Eve's Herbs, was not without critics. Some demographers argued his population data was too incomplete to draw firm conclusions. That debate is still open. What is not open is whether the plants he studied contained active compounds. On that point, the chemistry settled the argument. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Across the Roman Empire, the most documented contraceptive was Silphium, a plant that grew only along a narrow coastal strip of what is now Libya. It was so valued that the city of Cyrene put it on its coins. Traders carried it across the Mediterranean. Roman writers described it as irreplaceable, and physicians prescribed it for everything from fevers to contraception. By the 1st century CE, Silphium was gone. The exact cause remains debated, but the demand was not. Pliny the Elder recorded that the last known stock was sent to Emperor Nero as a curiosity, already recognized as an extinction in real time. The loss of Silphium is one of the few documented cases in ancient history where the destruction of a plant species was noted and mourned as it happened, not centuries later by archaeologists. What replaced it tells you something about necessity. Societies that lost access to Silphium did not stop trying. They turned to Queen Anne's lace, to pennyroyal, to artemisia, to cotton root bark. Enslaved women in the American South used cotton root bark, knowledge brought from West Africa and transmitted across generations in conditions where that knowledge had to be hidden or destroyed on discovery. Historian Charla Fett documented this in her work on medical practices among enslaved communities published in 2002. These were not superstitions. They were adaptive responses to an environment that offered no alternatives and no protection under law. The barrier method is older than most people assume. Ancient texts from Egypt and Rome describe linen sheaths, oiled papyrus, and fabric barriers. Cave paintings at Cambarelles in France, dated by some researchers to around 100 to 200 CE, appear to depict a sheathed figure, though that interpretation is contested. A Japanese woodblock print from 1690 depicts what is recognizably a condom. In 17th century Europe, physician Gabriele Falloppio, the same man whose name was later attached to the fallopian tubes, described a linen sheath soaked in an herbal solution, designed primarily to prevent syphilis. It required the man to wear it. He reportedly tested it on 1,100 men. Not one contracted syphilis, he claimed. The claim is impossible to verify. The attempt is not. What Falloppio understood, and what the Egyptian and Roman texts suggest people understood long before him, is that the problem of unwanted pregnancy and the problem of disease transmission were related problems with overlapping solutions. The deeper thing running through all of this is not the ingenuity of specific plants or the cleverness of specific cultures. It is the consistency of the desire itself. Across 4,000 years, across continents with no contact with each other, across vastly different legal and social systems, women were doing the same thing. They were observing. They were passing information. They were making decisions about their bodies in whatever space the world allowed them. That space was often very small. Roman law gave husbands authority over their wives' bodies. Medieval church doctrine treated contraception as a moral crime. In many periods and places, the knowledge survived not because it was written down, but because someone told their daughter, and their daughter told hers, in the same quiet register that kept 1,000 other necessary things alive. The Kahun papyrus author did not know Daucus carota existed. The Greek physician prescribing pomegranate had never heard of progesterone. The West African healer who knew what cotton root bark could do had no word for endocrinology, but they were all working on the same problem, arriving at overlapping answers through the one method available to them, watching what happened, remembering it, and telling someone else. Riddle called this the missing chapter of women's history, the chapter that was not suppressed by conspiracy but by assumption, the assumption that effective knowledge must look like modern knowledge to count as knowledge at all. It doesn't. It never did. The crocodile dung in the papyrus is alkaline. The acacia is lactic acid. The wild carrot disrupts progesterone. The silphium is gone, and we will never know exactly what it contained, but we know the Romans thought it was worth extinction. All of that was known before a single laboratory existed to explain why it worked. Some of it was known before the wheel. You are living at the far end of a very long line of people who were asking the same questions you take for granted having answers to. The answers changed. The question never did. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.